It's subtle. A smirk in a meeting, a yap at dinner, a joke that leaves everyone laughing except you. You sit there, frozen, smiling to play it off. But inside, you're shrinking. And the question hits you hard. Why would they say that in front of everyone? Maybe you've asked yourself, do I come off as weak? Why do I keep getting picked for this? You don't. And you're not. This isn't about you being small. It's about them needing to feel big. So today, we're going to break it down. 6 reasons people humiliate others publicly and how you can stop it. Not with noise, but with stoic calm, sharp awareness, and unshakable dignity. Let's begin. Let's set the record straight. This isn't about ego. This isn't about needing constant respect. This is about something much deeper, your dignity. Because when someone tries to humiliate you in front of others, they're not just mocking what you said. They're testing who you are. They're trying to shrink you where it hurts most in public, in front of witnesses, and your urge to defend yourself. It's not overreacting. It's your inner sense of worth, waking up. But here's the trap. If you lash out, they win. If you stay silent, they might double down. So, what's the answer? Stoicism. Not the kind that tells you to feel nothing, but the kind that teaches you to feel deeply without being controlled by emotion. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Marcus Aurelius. That's the core of this video. We're not here to label people. We're here to decode behavior to help you see what's really happening when someone tries to embarrass or dominate you. And more than that, we're here to show you how to respond with composure, clarity, and quiet control that commands respect without a word. Because when you own your dignity, you don't just stop the cycle, you break it. Some people don't raise their voices to dominate. They don't insult you directly. They don't even break the rules of polite conversation. Instead, they test you, softly, quietly, repeatedly. They say things like, "Don't take this the wrong way." But, "Just kidding. You're too sensitive." It's not a punch. It's a poke. A poke to see where the edge is, if there is one at all. These people operate like emotional predators. They don't roar. They observe. They scan for vulnerability. And what are they looking for? Uncertainty. Not weakness in the traditional sense, but subtle, internal hesitation. The way your eyes drop when you speak, the nervous laugh you let out when they cross a line, the way you brush off a comment that made you feel small, those things, they're signals. Signals that say, "I'm not sure I deserve better. I want to keep the peace more than I want to protect my worth." And to someone who feeds on control, that's blood in the water. Now here's the twist most people miss. This doesn't always come from malice. A lot of the time, it comes from their own unhealed pain. Psychologically, people who project their inner chaos often do so by testing others. They poke at your boundaries because they've never felt safe in their own. They push you because they were never taught how not to be pushed themselves. And when they sense uncertainty in you, they see a mirror of the very thing they fear in themselves. That's where the cycle begins. And if you don't see it, you play right into it. You rationalize the behavior. They're just joking. They didn't mean it. I'll let it go. It's not worth the drama. And in that silence, you train them. You tell them without meaning to. You can do this again. It won't stop you. Because let's be honest, people don't escalate cruelty because they're unaware. They escalate because they're unchallenged. But challenging them doesn't mean attacking. It doesn't mean matching their tone, their sarcasm, or their need for power. The Stoic solution: calm confrontation. You don't need volume. You don't need to justify your discomfort. You need presence. You need posture. Sometimes the most powerful boundary is not laughing at a joke that uses you as the punchline. It's holding their gaze just 1 second longer than expected. It's letting silence stretch until the air in the room feels different. It's not about being cold, it's about being anchored. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. And if it is not respectful, do not accept it. People who operate from self-respect don't need to explain it. They simply hold it. And that, holding the refusal to entertain even casual disrespect, changes how people interact with you. They pause. They second-guess that sarcastic jab. They think twice before they test your limits again. Because you've drawn a line, and you did it without drama, without ego, and without shame. That's Stoicism in practice. Not the absence of emotion, but the disciplined direction of it. And what happens when you hold that line? You no longer attract those who thrive on your uncertainty. You start to attract those who respect your presence. You stop being the one who wonders, why do they treat me like this? And you become the one who knows. It's not about who they are. It's about what I will and won't allow. And that subtle but powerful shift. That's how you go from being someone people test to someone people admire. Respect, and think twice before crossing. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to fight back. You simply don't play the game. That's the game changer. Not all humiliation comes from hatred. Sometimes it comes from insecurity wrapped in authority. This is especially common in environments where power is fragile: the workplace, team meetings, group dynamics, spaces where someone is in charge on paper but doesn't feel respected in reality. So what do? They reach for the fastest, cheapest tool to assert control: public humiliation. A sarcastic remark during a presentation, a passive-aggressive joke in front of others, a public correction for something that could have been handled in private. They do it not because it's necessary, but because it puts them back in the spotlight. It makes them feel like the dominant voice in the room. Humiliation becomes a strategy, a subtle psychological tool to destabilize you and re-establish themselves as the person in charge. But here's the truth: they don't want you to see their power isn't real. If it were, they wouldn't need humiliation to hold on to it. They wouldn't need to cut you down just to feel taller. What you're witnessing isn't leadership, it's domination theater. And often, it's driven by internal chaos. They feel out of control in some part of their life, so they try to control others in the one place they think they can, the public eye. Now, here's the part where most people get trapped. They respond emotionally. They get defensive. They try to prove their worth in front of the very audience that's watching. And that's exactly what the person wants. Because the more you explain, the more you react, the more you fumble under pressure, the more control they gain. But you're not powerless, not even close. This is where Stoicism shifts the game. Don't react. Reframe. You can't always stop someone from making the move, but you can choose how you interpret it. And that changes everything. Instead of thinking, "They embarrassed me," reframe it to, "They exposed their need for control and I didn't give it to them." That subtle mental shift puts you back in command, not of the room, but of yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "You always own the option of having no opinion. You don't have to take the bait. You don't have to correct every lie, defend every jab, or win back the crowd. Because real strength doesn't need the room to see your worth. You just need to see it yourself. And that may look like holding your tone instead of raising your voice. Looking directly at them, then calmly continuing, letting the awkward silence settle until everyone feels it. Speaking last, and with clarity. You see, when someone tries to make you feel small and you don't shrink, it unsettles them. Because the move didn't land. It didn't control you. It didn't change how you carry yourself. It didn't alter your presence. And that's power. Not reaction, but refusal. Refusal to be emotionally manipulated. Refusal to play by their script. Refusal to let someone else's insecurity define your value in the room. So next time you feel it, that subtle sting of a public jab, that pause. When everyone's watching how you'll respond, don't react. Reframe. Not for them. For you. Because the moment you stop handing over your emotional keys is the moment they realize they don't control anything here. Sometimes, you don't have to say a single word. You walk into a room with your head held high. You speak clearly, calmly. You live by values quiet. Unshaken, consistent, and that alone threatens people. You didn't attack. You didn't boast. You simply existed with self-assurance, and that alone made someone uncomfortable. Why? Because your confidence, your calm presence, your centered way of moving through life reminds them of everything they've abandoned in themselves. You don't humiliate them. Your light reveals their shadow, and that, for some people, is intolerable. This is where malicious envy comes into play. Not envy in the harmless "wow, I wish I had that way," but envy that wants to see you fall. Psychologists call this social comparison distress. It happens when someone sees your composure, your progress, your peace, and instead of being inspired, they feel threatened, because in that moment, your presence becomes a mirror, and what it reflects back to them is everything they've neglected, their own unkept potential, their own insecurity, their fear that they could have been more but weren't willing to do the work. And when people feel that contrast, they have two choices: rise to meet the standard you model, or tear you down to reset the room to their level. Guess which one is easier? They don't confront themselves. They come for you, not because you're weak, but because you're proof they could have chosen differently. They mock your principles. They minimize your discipline. They ridicule your peace. Not because they don't see value in them, but because you living that truth makes them painfully aware of what they've given up. Here's the Stoic response: don't dim your light. As Seneca put it, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more who is poor. Their cruelty isn't proof that you're too much. It's proof that they feel like less. So, instead of trying to explain yourself, stand still. Don't shrink. Don't soften your voice. Don't downplay your strengths just to make others feel less insecure. Because true Stoicism isn't about being liked. It's about being anchored in your own character. Let your self-respect make the insecure uncomfortable. Let your quiet consistency disturb those who live by noise. Let your grounded energy expose the chaos in others, not with arrogance, but with non-negotiable clarity. And when they try to make you feel guilty for who you are, or shame you into silence, remember this: you are not responsible for someone else's lack of self-esteem. You are not the villain in their story just because your peace doesn't include them. Hold your ground, not with defiance, but with presence, because the most powerful people in any room are the ones who don't need to be validated by it. And when you meet envy with silence, when you hold your light without apology, you force the insecure to do something they've avoided for years. Look inward. There's something no one tells you when you try to keep the peace. Silence doesn't prevent conflict, it just postpones the explosion. When someone crosses the line and you say nothing, you think you're choosing harmony. But in reality, you're training them. You're teaching them where the edge is. And if they keep pushing, it's because they haven't hit it yet. They joke at your expense, interrupt your thoughts, disregard your time, minimize your voice. Not always because they're cruel, but because you've given no reason for them to believe you won't allow it. That's the hard truth. But here's an even harder one. Nice people get trampled all the time. Not because they're weak, but because they confuse kindness with passivity. Because deep down, many kind, empathetic people are terrified of what setting a boundary might cost them. What if they think I'm rude? What if I lose the relationship? What if they talk behind my back? So they say nothing. They absorb discomfort. They tell themselves, it's not worth it. Until one day, they look around and realize they've built a life filled with silent violations. They've become a version of themselves who tolerates disrespect just to avoid being misunderstood. Here's what Stoicism teaches: clarity is greater than approval. You can't control what people think about your boundary, but you can control whether you honor it. And if you don't, you'll resent people for crossing lines you never clearly drew. Let me give you an example. Early in her career, Oprah Winfrey was told she was unfit for television, criticized for her weight, her voice, her authenticity. She was pressured to tone it down, to fit into someone else's mold of what was acceptable. She could have compromised. She could have conformed. But instead, she drew a line. She didn't change herself. She changed where she gave her energy. And the world adjusted. That's what boundaries do. They don't push people away. They filter them. And yes, some people will misunderstand you. They'll call you cold, difficult, arrogant, especially the ones who benefited from your silence. But that's okay. Because if your peace comes at the cost of constant appeasement, then it was never peace. It was performance. As Epictetus wrote, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. What he meant was this: growth often costs approval, and that's a price worth paying. Because real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from living in alignment with what you believe is right, even if it makes people uncomfortable. So how do you start? You don't need a dramatic speech. You don't need to burn bridges. You just need to say, I'm not okay with that. Please don't speak to me like that. I'm stepping away from this conversation. And then follow through. With calm, with clarity, with consistency, because boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're gates to decide who gets to stay in. And the moment you draw that line, you'll see something powerful happen. People either rise to meet it, or they remove themselves. Either way, you win. Not through dominance, not through aggression, but through quiet, unwavering self-respect. That's Stoic strength. It doesn't demand approval. It earns peace. Humiliation, when done in public, is rarely just about you. It's about the audience. Because for some people, cruelty only makes sense when it comes with applause. They don't humiliate you to correct you. They do it to elevate themselves. They want the room to notice. They want the group to laugh. They want the silence after the jab to feel like a win. What you're witnessing in moments like these isn't confrontation. It's performance. It's humiliation as theater. And you're not just the target. You're the prop. You were chosen not because you're weak, but because you're visible, because you're confident, or maybe because you were standing alone. This is where psychology steps in. It's called de-individuation, the phenomenon where people in crowds lose their personal responsibility. They laugh even when they don't want to. They stay silent even when they should speak. Why? Because deep down, no one wants to be next. In the presence of a group, many people will betray their own values just to avoid attention. So when someone is being mocked, they don't step forward, they step back and hope it passes. The person leading the humiliation, they rely on this. They know how social psychology works. They know the group will hesitate, and they know the more silent the crowd, the more powerful they appear. It's manipulation through spectacle, cruelty turned into currency. But here's what Stoicism offers you in those moments. Your silence doesn't have to mean submission. It can mean sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The opinion of 10 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Translation: just because the crowd agrees doesn't mean they're right. And more importantly, just because the crowd is silent doesn't mean they approve. Sometimes your best move isn't to speak up immediately, but to not participate. Don't laugh. Don't shift uncomfortably. Don't offer polite approval to keep the moment light. Hold still. Hold their eyes. Hold your center. Let your silence speak disapproval, not compliance. Because here's what most people don't realize. Power in groups is fragile. All it takes is one person, one calm, grounded presence to shift the atmosphere of an entire room. You don't have to attack. You don't have to call them out. You simply have to not give them the show they're hoping for. When someone throws public shade and it doesn't land, when they look around for validation and find nothing but composed stillness, the performance falls apart. Not because they were challenged, but because they were ignored, and ignored with intention. That's a Stoic move. Not giving energy to disrespect is not weakness. It's a decision to let their insecurity stay with them, instead of making it your burden. The person who humiliates others in front of a crowd is telling you something. They need witnesses. They need a stage. They can't stand confidently without a spotlight. But the truly powerful person, they don't need an audience to know their value. They don't perform to keep their dignity. They simply live it quietly, consistently, unmistakably. And when you do the same, you rob the performer of the one thing they crave most: a reaction, So next time someone tries to make you small in front of others, don't respond from fear. Don't respond from shame. Respond from anchored silence, and let them feel the discomfort of a room that refuses to clap. Let's end with the most personal truth of all. You get humiliated the most when you're not sure who you are. And I don't mean your name, your job, or what people say about you. I mean the internal knowing, that silent, steady belief that you matter, even when no one affirms it. Because when you haven't claimed your worth, when your identity is still being negotiated by other people's approval, you are easily controlled. Every compliment lifts you too high. Every insult cuts you too deep. You ride the emotional elevator of other people's opinions up, down, up, down, until you can't tell what's real anymore. And manipulators, they can feel that. They can sense when someone is externalized, when your value depends on how others treat you. So they use it. They push your emotional buttons because they know they're still wired to the outside. But here's the good news. This is not a fixed state. It's not your fate. It's a gap, and it can be closed. That work begins with this. You must decide who you are before the world tries to decide for you. And no one can do that work for you. True self-worth isn't loud. It's not defiance. It's not ego. It's a quiet anchoring that happens through thousands of tiny choices. The choice to hold your boundary when it would be easier to stay silent. The choice to tell the truth when lying would win you more friends. The choice to walk away when staying would keep you liked, but not respected. Self-worth is not inherited. It's not gifted. It's not given by likes, titles, or applause. It's forged through action, reflection, and values you refuse to betray. And here's where Stoicism becomes a mirror for this process. The ancient maxim, "Know thyself," wasn't just philosophical, it was strategic. Because the one who knows themselves deeply is unshakable. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." What does that mean? It means this. If someone can control your emotional state with a sentence, a smirk, a room full of silence, you are not yet free. You're still dependent, still plugged into a system where worth is earned from the outside. But when you shift, when you stop begging people to reflect your value back to you, you become untouchable. People will still try to humiliate you. They'll test you. They'll try to make you small. But there will be nothing to hook onto. Because your worth doesn't live in their words. It lives in your choices. It lives in how you carry yourself when no one is clapping, when no one is listening, when the room turns cold and you stay warm on your own. Let me tell you something. The moment you define yourself truly, without apology, the people who once tested you will lose interest. Because manipulation only works on those who are still searching for mirrors. So stop waiting for someone to crown you worthy. Stop living for feedback. Crown yourself. And yes, it takes time. It takes solitude. It takes being willing to stand alone, to feel misunderstood, to risk rejection in exchange for something greater. Freedom. And once you taste that freedom, the freedom of knowing exactly who you are and who you're not, no one can humiliate you again. Not because they won't try, but because the ground beneath you won't move. That is Stoic strength. Not armor to keep the world out, but roots that hold you steady when the world tries to shake you. Let's end with one truth that changes everything. You don't control what others say. You don't control how they treat you. But you always control who you decide to be. And that decision about how you carry yourself, how you hold your ground, how you walk into a room, that's yours alone. Humiliators thrive on illusion. They feed on your reaction. They borrow your dignity to make themselves look tall. But their power is a myth. It only exists when you believe they have it. When you stop believing that, everything changes. You don't need to yell. You don't need to fight for attention. You don't need to win a room. You only need to own your space quietly. That's Stoicism. Not a cold heart, but a solid foundation. One that doesn't rattle when someone throws a cheap shot. One that doesn't shatter when people laugh or stay silent. When your dignity is no longer dependent on other people's behavior, you become the one person in the room who doesn't need permission to be respected. And that stillness, that poise, that unspoken self-respect, it's louder than any insult. You don't command silence by raising your voice. You command it by standing tall when everyone else expects you to fall. Now, I want to hear from you. What's one moment you realized someone was trying to shrink you and you stood your ground? It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes the strongest stand is simply choosing not to laugh at a cruel joke, or refusing to explain yourself to someone who never earned the right to ask. Drop your story in the comments. Let's make this a space where self-respect isn't rare, it's real. If this video hit home, subscribe now. Because we're building a community that doesn't just survive manipulation, we rise above it. And when you're ready to level up, watch the next video. How to master quiet power, Stoic tactics for inner strength. Because respect doesn't come from noise. It comes from stillness. And you're learning to master both.